Hello, everybody. Hello. Whoa. It's me, Miss Sarika. And I'm here to tell you all about genetics. Ta-da! Color my hair in. La, 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 la. All right, so let's talk about genetics. We've got some vocab words today, and the first one we're going to start with is nucleus. And we're going to talk about DNA. And we're going to talk about genes. All right, so inside of all cells, almost, except for some special ones like blood cells, you've got all sorts of little bits here. These and these and these. You got stuff like this, like vacuoles, little teeny bits, blah, blah, blah. But right here in the middle is the nucleus. And the nucleus is the brain, kind of, the control center of the cell. And inside of the nucleus, you find DNA. And DNA is usually all tightly wound up into nice little squiggly packets. And DNA has the code for the species to tell that organism like how to behave, kind of. Not really behave, I guess, but maybe certain instincts or how it will function or which cells become which. I mean, every single type of cell has its own structure and kind of design, I guess, and what it does. And that's all coded in the DNA, not GNA. All right. Oh, purple. All right. So then we get to genes. So the DNA. Oh, that's really bad. The DNA. Yeah, that's a little bit better. That looks pretty okay. The DNA is a double helix, and it's called that because it's like these two little parts, 1, 2, swirling around each other, and that is the basic structure. And we've got all these nucleic acids in between that pair up, and all of that, believe it or not, is the code. These little nucleic acids, that's why it's called deoxyribonucleic acid, all pair together in order to tell the body what to do. Genes are like a specific snippet, like from here to here, or from here to there. Those would be the specific genes of the DNA, and those different small portions of the DNA have instructions for different parts of the species, the organism, different functions, different I can't think of the word right now. Different proteins to instruct the cells how to behave. And so these are the really important kind of basics that you might, kind of know these terms from before, but these are really important for the foundation of understanding what genetics is. So now we are going to go a little further into this, and we're going to learn about genes and how they inform us about traits. So traits are, so we had our genes here. Let's do our little picture again. Woo! And we've got our, come on. Sorry for all the tapping. That might be annoying. All right, so we know that a gene is going to be a specific section of the DNA. And this specific section is going to inform about the traits. So this is a specific gene, and that gene is the code that describes what traits that species is going to have. And these traits could be things like hair color. Oh, wait. I've got a fun idea. Wait, ready? So here's our little guy. It could be hair color. It could be eye color. Give you ears. It could be a plant's leaf shape, if it's like serrated, kind of jaggedy edges versus smooth edges on our leaf. Let's make it look fancy. It could be how something metabolizes or like uses its energy. The traits could be anything. It could be, it could be the fur color of a cat. It could be anything. Whatever the genes are coding, just all the different things and characteristics of a species. So you could think of traits as the characteristics. Great. All right, so that's important to understand that the DNA has the code for the genes. The genes tell what traits or characteristics that species has. So now we're going to talk about the term heredity. So heredity just refers to the idea that parents are going to pass on traits to their offspring. So we learned earlier that there's two types of reproduction. There's asexual and sexual reproduction. So if it was asexual reproduction, this is a little bacteria, hello, and it's reproducing asexually, it's going to make maybe mutated, but exact copies of itself. So it's passing on its genes, its DNA, its traits to its offspring, which gets us to the other word, which is offspring. Offspring is just a fancy way of saying babies, right? All right, so then we get to, though, in sexual reproduction, it's going to look the same as the bacteria, but it's not, I promise. Then we have a male and a female, and they reproduce, and they have offspring. But what's going to happen is, here's a couple girls, here's a boy. They're real happy. Yay, we look like bacteria. Oops. Maybe she says, oh no, I don't. This is getting silly. Why can't I draw an eye? There we go. All right, so these parents have combined their DNA and mixed it together. And that's what's special about sexual reproduction, is that it gives a new combination of DNA in order for the offspring to have more variety. And we learned about that with evolution, that having that variety, then the certain traits will become more common or not, depending on how well it helps a species to survive. So heredity is the passing down of genes and traits, and offspring are the little babies that are getting those traits from their parents. Now, a word you may have heard before, and I'll write this over here, that this is an example of asexual reproduction, and this is sexual reproduction. In order for those parents to pass on their genes, they are going to be using gametes or sex cells, or you can call those sex cells egg and sperm. And this is how their DNA gets passed down. There's something called mitosis and meiosis. And in meiosis, it's how each of the parents creates its own egg or sperm cells. And that DNA is half of what the parent originally had. So because DNA comes in that double helix, like this, double helix, what happens for their sex cells is that it gets split up. And so there's only one strand of DNA in the egg and only one strand of DNA in the sperm. And when they reproduce, those get combined together. And that's what creates the new offspring's DNA. It's a new combination because the parents each split their DNA in half and recombined it in the offspring. All right, so back to the genes. All right, when we are talking about genes and genetics, we are going to use a lot of new vocabulary, and I'm going to help kind of explain it here. The first idea is the word allele. Allele. Looks fancier than it really is. An allele is just a version of a trait. It's a version of a trait. Boop. So for an allele, let's do an easy one. This is a really common one people use, is eye color. So we talk about brown eyes and we talk about blue eyes. I'll just get that up here real quick. Ta-da! Magic. All right, so we've got this brown eye here. We've got this blue eye here. So the trait that we're talking about is eye color. That's our trait. That is our trait. And with this trait of eye color, there are different options. And that's what an allele is. It's the version, or even if you want to think of it as an option of a trait. And there's different ways that then we can write that down. So it's really hard to like go in and talk about the DNA in terms of its little nucleic acids, like I mentioned before. So instead of kind of getting really complicated, we do simple symbols to help represent. So we talk about letters usually. And because DNA is double-stranded, it comes in pairs. And so genes come in pairs, and that's important to know. They come in pairs. So if you have brown eyes, you might have genes that look like this, big B, big B. And if you have blue eyes, it might look like this, little b, little b. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but know that they come in pairs. That's important to understand because one came from the mom. Let's see if this works. One came from the mom and one came from the dad. One came from the mom and one came from the dad. So that's important to understand that these genes are getting passed down, one from mom, one from dad, because we're talking about sexual reproduction when we're talking about these traits right now. All right, so now we're going to throw in some new vocab on top of all this, I know. So we're going to learn, let's get another color up here. Green. All right, so we've got 2 new ideas here, and those are this kind of code, and then there's what the eye looks like. The code that talks about the genes is called the genotype. This is the little code word or code symbols that we use to try and explain to someone what kind of genes combination that a different species, a little organism might have. The color is called the phenotype. The phenotype is the actual description. So the phenotype is the actual physical trait that we observe. The genotype is the code of that trait. So the genotype is what's coded in the DNA. The phenotype is what actually we see. So when we look at our alleles, which are these guys here, the alleles are the different versions of the trait, and you see the different alleles in for the different eye colors, that the genotype is the code for the alleles, and the phenotype is what that eye, in this case, would actually look like. Okay, so now that we know a little more about all the genes, we're going to learn some other words, and this hopefully should be kind of easy now that you've seen some of the other info, and they are dominant, I'm going to do this on purpose, and recessive. So dominant traits or dominant alleles, which are, remember, the version of a trait. Dominant means that it is going to kind of stand up and out if it's present. So a dominant is going to be written with a capital letter. Capital letter. Recessive is going to be written by a lowercase letter. And a recessive trait or a recessive allele is only going to show itself if there's no dominant present. So look here at this blue eye genotype. You'll see that it has 2 little b's. Because there's no dominant one, so our example of dominant would be, in this case, a big B, and this is a little b. And just so you know, you can use any letters you want. It doesn't really matter. It's just a little code to help describe it. So for this blue eye color, there's no dominant allele present. Therefore, the phenotype we see is a blue eye. But over here, it has 2 big B in its genotype. The big B's are dominant alleles. Because there's a dominant allele present, you're going to see the dominant phenotype show up. So some of you might be thinking, well, what happens if you have a genotype where there's 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele? And what do you think? All right, let's draw our little eyeball. I'm going to pause and do a little movie magic. Ta-da! All right, if you guessed that there would be a brown eye phenotype for this particular genotype, you were right. But why is that? Well, because we've got this dominant allele present, it's going to show up and mask this recessive allele. The recessive only shows up. It only ever shows up if there is no dominant allele. Whoops. Can we go back? Oh, we can go back. Hey, that's fun. I just learned something new. All right, it only shows up if there is no dominant allele. So in this case, because we have a dominant allele present, the dominant phenotype is going to show up. And remember, phenotype is the actual physical trait that you're going to see. That's a lot of vocab words. Guess what? We've got a few more. All right, so we've got a couple other crazy words here. These are really big words. They're not too tricky once you understand what they mean, but at first you're going to be like, what? Okay, so we've got a couple different things happening. Do you see here how we've got 2 big B's and 2 little b's? And then over here, get my green, we've got a big B and a little b. So that's going to give us kind of a hint for our next vocab terms. I want to do purple. Let's get purple. Where are you at, purple? There we go. All right, we've got 2 fancy words. So the first one, the first word is heterozygous. And the second word is homozygous. All right. The prefix hetero means different. The prefix homo means, or maybe they're not prefixes, but whatever. The homo prefix there means same. So hetero means different. And this means same. Can you guess which genotype or genotypes would be considered heterozygous? That's right. Good job. Big B, little b is considered a heterozygous genotype. So then the homozygous genotypes would be the big B, and little b. So these are both considered homozygous because the alleles, which are those versions of the traits, are the same. All right? So that's kind of a lot of information all at once. I would recommend pausing and processing all this, which you will be doing anyway with some other activities too, and take it all in. And there's those vocab words from the Quizlet that you can check out as well. And really just take some time to think about all these terms. It's not too complicated. It's just a lot of new terminology to put to something that is, again, not too complicated. Something that sort of makes sense once you really get your brain wrapped around it. It's just a lot of new vocab. All right?